At $170 and no subscription for the basic functions, the Amazfit Helio Ring is the cheapest smart ring I've ever tested. But of course you guys want to know if it's any good, and that's all we'll find out in this video. And just to reveal some things up front, I do think that for some people this ring could be the way to go, but it's very important you're aware of its limitations. And as most of you will know, Oura, so this is the Oura Ring 4 right here, pioneered or at least popularized this kind of concept. And they're the market leader at the moment with the Oura Ring 4. Now the Oura Ring is indeed the best smart ring out of all rings I've tested, but it's also the most expensive. And that's not actually because the device itself, so the Oura Ring, is that expensive, but it's because Oura charges a $6 monthly subscription, which is a lot or maybe not that much depending on where you live and your income. So it'd be great if there's an alternative like the Helio Ring, but it has to do well. But that does mean that the Helio Ring has big shoes to fill if it wants to replace the Oura Ring. So let's first take a look at the app it provides. Is that experience any good? Because that's one of the strengths of the Oura Ring. And luckily the app design is pretty good. It's actually suspiciously similar to the Whoop Straps app. Now the Whoop Strap is actually a very popular health tracker like the Oura Ring. I always wear one myself. You can wear it anywhere, so it's not in a ring format but in a strap format, so I'm wearing it here, but you can also wear it anywhere. Most people actually wear it on their wrist, but I prefer the biceps. And the Whoop Strap, similar to the Oura Ring, actually has a great app, so it makes sense that Amazfit would steal from the best. The Zepp app that the Helio Ring uses has 4 main tabs called Overview, Readiness, Sleep and Exertion. And to compare, let's now see what the tabs in the Whoop Straps app look like. Whoop has 4 main tabs as well, called Overview, Sleep and then Recovery and Strain. So those are not exactly the same, and in addition to just seemingly having renamed 2 terms and passing it off as something different, the term readiness is also something that the Oura Ring uses as one of the main metrics, so it's not something original as well. Now the overall design and metrics inside each of these tabs of the Zepp app are also very similar to the design of the Whoop Strap, like very similar. Let's for instance take a quick look at the sleep statistic on the one hand for the Whoop Strap and the sleep metrics of the Zepp app on the other hand. It's more or less a carbon copy design of Whoop. So I would say that's both good and bad, since I really do like the design of the Whoop app, so I also like the design of the Zepp app, but it just feels a bit unfair to just directly copy something. Now this is me assuming that Whoop came up with this design first, and I hadn't seen the Zepp app at this point, but I think it's pretty likely Whoop was the original designer. But if I'm wrong, please let us know in the comments below and I'll make a pinned comment to clarify that. But okay, let's assume you don't care about the copy design. This does mean you get a very nice app with a lot of potential information at least. There's an overall readiness score very similar to what you get with Oura, which gives you an overall overview of your health status, so very good. And in addition you also get a sleep score for your sleep. There's also things like resting heart rate variability and skin temperature, so all the expected metrics we can use to judge our sleep and recovery. In addition, you can also track your workouts, tracking your heart rate with the Ring using the Zepp app. And this is something that rings generally struggle with, so let's see if the Helio Ring was any good. I do need to mention here that for some reason the app was mostly made for outdoor activities, and I was able to start 4 different activities: outside running, walking, outside cycling and inside running. Now you might be thinking, well, inside running is inside, right? Yeah, that's true, but I couldn't use that particular exercise because when I did use it, it actually didn't record any distance ran, as in 0 miles, since I couldn't connect it to the treadmill. And with 0 miles ran, it doesn't allow you to save the activity. From my empirical testing, it seems that you need at least 50 meters or so to save the activities. So for my indoor exercises, I actually always start an outside bike ride or an outside run and just make sure to walk around the apartment afterwards with the GPS on to get to 50 meters. So I honestly cannot really recommend this at the moment, but I still wanted to get the data, so I did the best I could. If you have any knowledge about this, let us know in the comments below. Maybe I didn't find all the correct options to get other exercises, but at least it wasn't very intuitive. Anyway, let's get started by testing the heart rate tracking performance. And let's first take a look at one of the easier exercises for a watch to track indoor cycling. Now, indoor cycling is easy since there's relatively little motion and also not that much tension on my arm and finger. And this plot right here shows you an overview of the 4 indoor cycling sessions that I did, where I compare it against an ECG reference strap from Polar, which is along the horizontal axis and which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. And on the vertical axis is the Amazfit Helio. And if the measurements would perfectly agree between the reference and the ring, all values should be along this blue line right here. But as you can see, most of the points are not close to the blue line. Actually, many of them are quite far away from it right here. And this indicates that most of the time, the Amazfit Helio recorded a heart rate between, let's say, 80 and 100 BPM, whereas in reality, in these moments, my heart rate was somewhere between 140 and let's say 165 BPM. So for some reason, I don't really understand how and why it kept detecting the same heart rate no matter what happened. Yes, sometimes, like right here, detected a lower heart rate, sometimes a bit of a higher heart rate, But it seems like maybe 90% of the time, I mean, I'm really guesstimating here, it estimated the same heart rate between 80 and 100 BPM, so not looking very good. That also means that the correlation is quite low here at 0.45. So the correlation is at R value, and the higher the correlation, the better the agreement between the reference and the ring. And an ideal correlation would be 1.00, so 0.45 is actually quite far away from that. But let's take a look at the individual spinning sessions, so indoor bike rides, to see if there's still any redeeming qualities in the Amazfit Helio. And here we have the first example interval spinning session I wanted to share with you, where we see exactly what the issue is. So along the horizontal axis we have the clock time, and my heart rate is along the vertical axis, with the Amazfit Helio Ring depicted in red and the reference device in blue-green. And as you can see, it had multiple intervals where my heart rate would increase and then decrease in between, then increase again, etc. And the Amazfit Helio Ring, for this session at least, sometimes detected some of my higher heart rates, but in many cases it just kept detecting a low heart rate, and generally somewhere around 100 or slightly below 100 BPM, so somewhat what we expected. This doesn't look as bad as I expected, but this definitely wouldn't be good enough for me. And if you look at another spinning session here, it just lost signal for a while, so basically this was completely lost. And then for this session right here, generally all the time it was detecting a heart rate somewhere between, let's say, 80 and 100 BPM, so what we saw in that overview plot. And then interestingly, at the end of each of the intervals, so when I was starting to rest in between, it then picked up that slightly higher heart rate, but it was never able to fully detect the peaks in my heart rate. This really doesn't look that good. Also for this session right here, the first part shows the exact same patterns, so I'm not sure why there's this loss of signal there as well, but overall not looking very good for the Helio Ring. And we can actually put these results into context by comparing them against many of the other devices I tested in the past. You can see that in this overview right here. Along the horizontal axis we have that correlation value we were looking at before, and we want that value to be as close to 1 as possible. And on the vertical axis I ordered the watches from worst to best, so the further to the right and the higher devices, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And as you can see, the Amazfit Helio Ring marked in red right here really isn't doing well. It's the second worst device out there. It's actually quite close to the Oura Ring 4, so another ring, and also the Oura Ring 3. So all of these are doing about the same. All of them wouldn't be good enough for me. Potentially the Oura Ring is doing a tiny bit better, but nothing significant. And it's actually also quite close to some older Amazfit devices like the T-Rex Pro and BipU Pro. But as you might know, some newer Amazfit devices did better. So let's zoom in a bit so we can look at some of the better devices. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And as I mentioned before, the Amazfit T-Rex 3 is actually doing much better than previous Amazfit devices. It's among some of the better devices out there actually for tracking your heart rate during cycling inside. That's the first time any Amazfit device did well in my testing for heart rate. Now, unfortunately, the Helio Ring is not one of them, but if you're really a fan of Amazfit, then the T-Rex 3 would be a good option. I think in general, rings are a hard form factor to use for tracking your heart rate while working out. Some of the best devices out there are different Apple Watches, the Pixel Watch 3, and some Huawei devices. So if you're really into heart rate tracking and you don't want to wear a chest strap, I would recommend one of those. So not a very promising start for the Helio Ring, but let's next take a look at running, which might actually be an easier exercise for something like a ring to track, since there's no tension on my fingers. Whereas when I'm cycling, there might be some tension on my fingers when I'm holding the handlebars. But before doing that, do you like these videos? Do you want to get early access to results? And do you want to support me in making these videos? Then please consider becoming a YouTube member. I've been running this channel all by myself next to my full-time job as a scientist for several years, but I now honestly need some help to keep it going. So if you want to support me in paying my editor Alex and get some perks in return, check out the link up here or down here. And let's get back to the testing. And here we have a similar overview to before, but now for running outside. And as you can see, this does look a bit better. There are more points close to the blue line and much less clear deviations away from the blue line. There's some right here, so here detected a too high heart rate for a bit. But otherwise, it actually doesn't look that bad. The correlation is also quite a bit higher now at 0.66. Still not very good, but definitely better compared to what we saw for cycling inside. But let's quickly take a look at some of the individual runs to see why it sometimes still detects a too low heart rate like right here, or too high heart rate like right here. And here we can see the first run that I did with the Helio Ring, which looks quite okay, I would say. Near the end, it actually looks quite good. In the beginning, it struggled a bit, so detected a too low heart rate for quite a big part of the first run. I'm not sure if my hand was still warming up in the colder weather in December, so maybe my blood flow wasn't ideal in the beginning and it was better near the end, That could be one reason, but let's take a look at some other runs as well. Here we have the second run that I did, where again in the beginning it really struggled, in this case detected too high heart rate, and near the end it was a lot better. Here it was almost perfect. So again, it could be due to the cold temperatures outside and my hand warming up a bit, though I do tend to wear gloves, so I'm not sure how big of a factor that is. And this third run actually looks quite good. Again, it struggled a bit more in the beginning. I also did fewer intervals, so it might have had an easier time. Overall, looking quite good for this run. This second to last run I wanted to share with you. Again, it looks better near the end than in the beginning, but overall still looking quite good. And this last run actually looks very similar. So again, better near the end, not perfect, but most of the struggles were here in the beginning where it detected too low heart rate. Now, I'm not sure if these deviations are due to cadence lock, so where it detects the cadence, so the frequency at which you're running instead of the frequency of your heart rate. This is some interference pattern that exists, and it's actually quite hard for many watches to detect your heart rate when you're running. So I'm not sure if that's the reason that it was detecting that when the blood flow was not so easily detected. But overall, definitely much better performance than what we saw for cycling indoors, but still not ideal. And we can again put these results into perspective of many of the other devices I tested previously. And as you can see, the Helio Ring marked in red right here is amongst the poorer performing devices. So it's actually quite close to the Oura Ring again, so it makes some sense, both the Oura Ring 3 and Oura Ring 4 right here. These are potentially doing a tiny bit better, so all of these devices in this overview are actually not doing terribly. Running appears to be a relatively easy exercise for many devices to track, so the lowest correlation out there is about 0.5, whereas what we saw for cycling indoors, and especially what we'll see for cycling outdoors later, the correlations can be as low as 0.1 or something. So even though the Helio Ring is the lowest device out there, it's not the absolute worst performance you could see. But again, there are many better devices out there. So if you want decent heart rate tracking during running, I wouldn't select the Helio Ring. I would also not select the Oura Ring, but I would potentially select an Apple Watch, a Pixel Watch 3, an Amazfit T-Rex 3, even the Forerunner 165 from Garmin did quite well on me. So there's definitely better options out there. That actually isn't that bad, or at least not as bad as what we saw for indoor cycling. Still, I suspect there might have been some cadence lock going on, where the frequency at which I'm running confuses the heart rate sensor, since the frequency is very close to my heart rate. So not something I would rely on, but still also not absolutely terrible. Next, let's take a look at the results for outside biking. And here you can see that overview, but now for biking outside for a total of 11 bike rides. And as you can see, this looks a bit weird in some way. So here we have the full shape of points. Most of them are below the blue line, and they form sort of this triangle-like shape where it's not a perfect triangle, so with a straight angle, but it's somehow slanted like this. So it seems like quite often the Helio Ring detects a too low heart rate, but it's not a perfect range like we saw for cycling inside, where it often detects the heart rate, but it's really a wide range of heart ranges from maybe 70 BPM till the real 150 BPM that it should have been detecting right here. So really a spread of points, and it's quite interesting to look at this. That also means the correlation is quite low now at 0.42, but I really want to see the individual bike rides to see what's going on here. And here we see one example bike ride, which I think represents well what's going on with the Amazfit Helio Ring. So the Helio Ring is plotted in red and the reference device in blue-green. And what you can see is that quite often when there's an increase in heart rate, there's somehow a steady increase in the heart rate in the Helio Ring, but still too low. So you can see right here, for instance, it definitely detected a higher heart rate than in the beginning of this section right here, but it just kept steadily increasing instead of actually following the actual heart rate. It's also what you can see right here, for instance. So it increased a bit, it actually decreased a bit again, but there's sort of a steady increase over this entire period. And there's also missing data. So for instance, right here between this point and this point, it stopped detecting my heart rate. And you'll see in a few other sessions later on, it also missed that heart rate. So for the second example, we mostly see something similar. So a steadily increasing heart rate, but always too low, and also some missing data. This session right here again has a lot of missing data. I'm not sure what's going on here. Here again, similar patterns with too low heart rates generally being detected. Also right here, too low for most of the rides. And for this longer bike ride, it just has a lot of missing data. So I know for sure for this bike ride, the whole time I had my phone with me, so it should have been able to detect that Bluetooth signal to receive the heart rate, but it just didn't for the majority of the ride. So overall, not looking amazing, and also a lot of data. Maybe for the shorter bike ride, it's not as bad, but for the longer one right here in terms of missing data, this is definitely not looking good. But again, for context, let's put these results into perspective. And you're familiar with this overview by now, so we want the device to be as far to the top right as possible. And as you can see, the Amazfit Helio Ring marked in red right here is amongst the lower performing devices. And it's actually almost identical in performance to the Oura Ring 3, so doing about the same. Both of them not looking very good. Also, the Oura Ring 4 is not doing very well. So all these devices right here just aren't good enough for tracking my heart rate while cycling outside. And if you just want to look at some of the best devices, we need to zoom in a bit. So these are just the watches with a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And as you can see, again, the best performing devices are different Apple watches, the Pixel Watch 3, some Huawei devices, also the Fitbit Charge 6, for instance. And here we also have the Amazfit T-Rex 3, the first Amazfit device that's doing quite well for heart rate tracking. But again, unfortunately not the Helio Ring. It's much harder to do this in the ring form factor, so I totally understand why Amazfit struggled with this, but I was hoping for better performance since the T-Rex 3 also did better. But let's now combine all of these results and see what that looks like. And here we have an overview of all the results we just looked at with the different workouts along the horizontal axis. So we have indoor cycling, also called spinning, biking outside, running indoors and running outdoors. Now we actually didn't look at running indoors before because there was so much missing data that I couldn't really make sense of it. This percentile is therefore a bit deceiving, so just ignore this for now. My code just takes any data that there is and doesn't take into account that there was way too much missing data to actually make this analysis. But for the other sports, we can clearly see where the Amazfit Helio Ring is located. And just to clarify, along the vertical axis we have that correlation we were looking at before, and each dot in these plots is a different device, where I marked the Amazfit Helio Ring in red. And again, we want those red lines to be as high as possible, and it's actually quite low. So we have that correlation value we were looking at before, and then the percentile. And this percentile indicates what percentage of devices did worse than the Helio Ring. And in most cases, most devices do a lot better than the Helio Ring. So here only 2% of the devices, or in other words, one device did worse than the Helio Ring. For biking outside, only 11% did worse, only a few devices. And also for running, really it's amongst the worst devices out there, even though the correlation is definitely a bit better. In general, I just cannot recommend using your Helio Ring for tracking your heart rate while working out. It's probably good enough for tracking your heart rate during the night, so your resting heart rate will likely be reliable, but that's a relatively easy task. And given the fact that it did reasonably well during running, I expect it can easily do that. But for anything that requires some kind of activity, I just don't expect it's good enough. Okay, we can all see that doesn't look great. So for workout tracking, I wouldn't use the Amazfit Helio Ring. The tracking accuracy is honestly pretty terrible, and also the number of exercises you can select is very limited. But sleep tracking is arguably much more important with something like a ring. So can the Helio Ring track this? Let's do a deep dive into the sleep stage tracking performance by testing it against an EEG device that can actually measure my brain waves. But first, if you're finding these videos interesting, it really helps me get access to new devices sooner, like the Helio Ring, and helps me reach more people if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Pressing those two buttons really makes a huge difference, and commenting of course also help. I would really appreciate it. But let's get back to the testing. And here you can see an overview of the sleep test results for a total of 30 nights. Now, to test the sleep stage tracking performance, I compared the Amazfit Helio Ring against the Z-Max EEG headband, which can actually measure my brain waves. Now, this device definitely also has its limitations, especially when it comes to detecting awake time, but it will give us a general impression of the sleep stage tracking performance of the Helio Ring. Now, on top are the sleep stages as recorded by the Z-Max EEG device, and on the left are the sleep stages as recorded by the Helio Ring. And each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Z-Max was predicted as a sleep stage by the Helio Ring. And if they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. And first of all, we see that about 37% of what was deep sleep according to the Z-Max was also predicted as deep sleep by the Helio Ring, so not looking very good. More of it was actually predicted as being light sleep instead at about 45%. Light sleep agreement is the only potentially reasonable agreement at about 59%. There was still a lot of confusion with REM sleep at about 26%. And there was even still quite a bit of confusion with deep sleep. Now, REM sleep agreement definitely doesn't look very good with about 33% agreement. And much more was instead predicted as being light sleep instead. So for all these three sleep stages right here, according to the Z-Max, so deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep, always light sleep was the most predicted sleep stage by the Helio Ring. So really not looking good. Now, as I said, we won't be focusing on awake time, but just for completeness, 23% of all awake time according to the Z-Max was also predicted as awake time by the Helio Ring, but this doesn't really say anything about the performance of the Helio Ring. But now I really want to see the individual nights to see what's going on here, so let's take a look at those. Now, looking at the individual nights will definitely help us understand that even better, and here we can see the first night I wanted to share with you. On top we have the sleep stages as recorded by the Z-Max EEG headband, with along the horizontal axis the clock time and my sleep stages on the vertical axis, and on the bottom a similar plot but now for the Helio Ring. And as you can see, it doesn't look great. Looking at deep sleep, for instance, we can see that according to the Z-Max, I had two main deep sleep segments marked in red right here. And if we overlap that with the Helio Ring, this really doesn't look that good. The Helio Ring detected deep sleep all throughout the night, which is not a typical sleep pattern, and it really only very partially matches with the EEG device. To me, this seems like a random distribution of deep sleep, so really not looking very good. Now, this second night looks potentially a bit better, so I had 3 main deep sleep segments, and these somewhat overlap with the Amazfit Helio Ring, but a lot of extra deep sleep is again detected, and it only partially overlaps. So I'm really not convinced. Now, looking at REM sleep, this is even worse, and this is marked in red right here. So normally you go through different sleep cycles, all of which end with REM sleep, and likely here I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sleep cycles, I would say, and you cannot see any of that based on the Helio Ring. The Helio Ring mostly detects REM sleep here in the first 2/3 of the night, whereas normally you have more REM sleep near the end of the night, and it's really somewhat randomly distributed, so really not looking good. And for this second example night, we potentially see a slightly better overlap effect, especially for these first 2 segments right here. But otherwise, this just doesn't look very convincing. I don't think it matches much at all in terms of REM sleep tracking. So I really just wouldn't trust the Helio Ring to track my REM sleep. And again, let's put these results into context. And we can do that by looking at a lot of the other devices I tested as well. That's displayed in this overview right here. So along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages. And on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. That means that the better the agreement of different devices with the EEG devices, the more to the top right they are. Now, this overview is slightly complicated because I couldn't always use the same reference devices. So the devices marked in green were tested against the ZMax EEG headband, so the same one we use in this video. Devices not marked in any color were tested against the Dream 2 EEG headband, a device I cannot use at the moment because Dream went bankrupt. And the devices marked in blue-purple were tested against polysomnography, which is the gold standard in sleep stage tracking. And I do have to mention, at least for this video, all of my testing was done on me, so I cannot say if everything translates to others as well, but this is the only way I can systematically test all devices at the moment. So take everything with a grain of salt and also check out some other reviewers. But let's take a look. Where do we see the Amazfit Helio Ring? Well, it is all the way down here. So really among some of the poorer performing watches. So all the good devices are in the top right here, and all the worst devices are on the bottom left right here. So it's close to, for instance, the TicWatch Pro 5, but also let's see what other devices we have. We have the Amazfit Balance right here, different Huawei devices, all of them not doing very well. Especially Mi Band, so the Mi Band 8 and Mi Band 9 are really poor sleep stage trackers. And the best devices out there are actually Apple Watches. Also the Nucoa app, now called Sleep 2, is one of the better sleep stage trackers out there. 8 Sleep is really good, but also much more expensive. So you really need to have some money to spend to get an 8 Sleep pod. I use it every day. It also cools the bed and heats the bed independently on each side. So I love it. So it does a lot more than just tracking, but it's really quite expensive. And also the Oura Ring is quite a good sleep stage tracker. So the Oura Ring in terms of sleep stage tracking is a lot better than the Helio Ring right here. I don't trust the Helio Ring at all, and I do trust the Oura Ring to a large degree. Now, these are the first tier devices I mentioned so far. So Oura, 8 Sleep, Apple, and Sleep 2. And then in the second tier, we have Fitbit and Google. So Google owns Fitbit, so they use the same sleep stage tracking algorithm. And there you can generally get a very good deal. So if you order an older Fitbit device, you'll get the same sleep stage tracking performance as a newer Pixel device. So if you want to save some money, I would use one of those. And also the Whoop strap is quite good. So the Whoop strap isn't quite as good as Oura, for instance, or 8 Sleep or Apple. It's in a second tier together with Fitbit, Google, but still good enough for me. And these are the only ones I would recommend at this point. And again, I just wouldn't use the Amazfit Helio Ring for sleep stage tracking. So the Helio Ring isn't great at sleep stage tracking, at least not on me. In fact, it's amongst the worst devices out there. I personally wouldn't use it for sleep stage tracking. However, that doesn't mean that the sleep tracking in general is completely useless. First off, the most important thing to track is your total time in bed and total time asleep, and most devices can do that, and I think the Helio Ring can do it too. So for just 1, keeping you accountable, spending enough time in bed, and 2, keeping a consistent sleep schedule, the Ring is probably fine. The Helio Ring also tracks your resting heart rate, which I unfortunately wasn't able to test, but given the fact that it wasn't terrible at tracking my heart rate while running outside, I'm willing to take the gamble that it is able to measure my resting heart rate at night, which is one of the easiest heart rates to track. Now, resting heart rate is also an important indication of sleep quality, and in the long term also an indicator of fitness, so something good to track. However, again, something like the percentage of deep sleep and REM sleep reported by the Helio Ring is not something I would trust. So what's my overall conclusion on this ring? Well, it doesn't make my top list of devices, and I cannot recommend it to anyone that wants any detail in their sleep and sports tracking. However, if you're just looking to keep yourself accountable for getting enough sleep and you want some basic sleep tracking, it might just be the best deal you can get on a ring. At just $170 on Amazon, it's much cheaper than any of the other rings I've tested before, and I really like the color too. I've actually gotten more compliments on it than than any other ring I've worn before. Now, one oddity is that the ring is mostly only available in 3 sizes, the sizes 8, 10 and 12. That means I was forced to wear this size 10 on my middle finger for it to fit reasonably well, so sizing options appear to be limited at this time. Now, if you want to get sneak previews on the results, consider becoming a YouTube member, and if you do decide to get the Amazfit Helio Ring, a Whoop strap, an Oura Ring, an HSleep Pod 4, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, and you want to support the channel and save some money at the same time, there are different affiliate links in the description below. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Helio Ring, I think you will like this video on the Oura Ring or this video on the Whoop strap. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video.